Good evening. Welcome to Kenya News Update today. We begin with a story from South Africa that speaks to a global crisis of inequality and desperation. In a township just 30 miles east of Johannesburg, a mechanical digger recently filled in holes in the dark brown earth. This simple act brought to an end a brief but intense gold rush that saw dozens of fortune seekers descend on what was once a cattle field. The story, reported by The Guardian, is titled, "We're Hungry, There Are No Jobs, A South African Township's Desperate Gold Rush." It's a microcosm of a much larger problem. Tonight, we take a deep dive into this desperate scramble for survival, what it says about the state of the global economy, and the stark choices facing governments, including our own here in Kenya under President William Ruto. We'll examine the numbers, the human cost, and the debate over solutions. Our story starts in Gugulethu, an informal settlement of dirt roads and metal shacks on the outskirts of the mining town of Springs. Less than 2 weeks ago, a rumor spread like wildfire on social media. Someone had found gold while digging a hole for a fence post in a field on the settlement's edge. Within hours, the quiet field was transformed. Dozens of people, armed with picks, shovels, and sheer hope, began digging. They weren't professional miners. They were unemployed residents, young and old, driven by a single powerful motivator: hunger. The promise of instant wealth, of a way out of crushing poverty, proved irresistible. One local resident, speaking to reporters, captured the mood perfectly. He said, and I quote, "We're hungry, there are no jobs. What do you expect us to do?" This sentiment echoes far beyond the borders of South Africa. It's a cry heard in informal settlements across the African continent and in struggling communities worldwide. To understand the scale of the desperation, we need to look at the numbers that define this crisis. South Africa's official unemployment rate stands at a staggering 32.9% as of the last quarter. But that headline figure masks a deeper tragedy. When you look at youth unemployment, the numbers are even more catastrophic. For young people aged 15 to 24, the unemployment rate soars to over 60%. That's 6 out of every 10 young South Africans actively seeking work who cannot find it. This is the powder keg. This is the pool of desperate individuals who heard a rumor about gold and saw not a fantasy, but a potential lifeline. Let's visualize that disparity. The contrast between general and youth unemployment paints a clear picture of a generation being left behind. Now let's talk about the gold itself. The rush in Gugulethu wasn't for large nuggets. Prospectors were sifting through the soil for tiny flakes, what's known as alluvial gold. The value of this gold is highly volatile, tied to the global market. At the time of the rush, an ounce of gold was trading for around $2,400. But for the individuals digging with their hands, the yields were minuscule. Reports suggest a typical day's hard labor might yield gold worth between £65 and £92 12 pence. Converted, that's roughly between 12,000 shillings and 17,000 shillings. For context, that's less than what many entry-level formal jobs in Nairobi might pay for a month's work, earned here in a single day of backbreaking, illegal, and dangerous labor. Yet, when you have nothing, that sum represents a fortune. It can buy food, pay a debt, or keep a family afloat for another week. The calculus of poverty is brutal and immediate. The potential daily haul, while small in the grand scheme, was a powerful magnet. The local municipality and police moved quickly to shut down the illegal mining operation. They cited safety concerns: the deep, unstable holes posed a lethal risk, and the illegality of the activity. A mechanical digger was brought in to fill the pits, literally burying the dreams of those who dug them. This is where the debate truly begins. On one side, you have the authorities who have a duty to uphold the law and ensure public safety. Unregulated mining is incredibly dangerous. Collapses are common, and without proper equipment, miners are at constant risk. Furthermore, the activity was on land not owned by the miners, raising issues of trespass and property rights. The swift action to close the site was, from a bureaucratic and legal standpoint, the correct and predictable response. But on the other side, you have the desperate human reality. When the state fails to provide the most basic necessities, employment and food security, does it retain the moral authority to forbid people from trying to survive? This is the core ethical dilemma. One perspective argues that order and law must be maintained, that chaos cannot be allowed to flourish, and that proper channels for economic participation must be followed. The other perspective asks what proper channels exist for someone with no education, no connections, and an empty stomach. The gold rush was a symptom, not the disease. Eradicating the symptom without treating the disease is a temporary fix at best. So, what are the root causes? Economists point to several factors. South Africa's economy has been stagnant for years, with growth hovering around 0.6%. The mining sector, once the backbone of the economy, has been in decline due to aging infrastructure, policy uncertainty, and labor unrest. There has been a failure to diversify the economy and create jobs in new sectors at a pace that matches population growth. Furthermore, the legacy of apartheid continues to cast a long shadow, with deep inequalities in education, wealth, and opportunity persisting decades after its official end. This creates a perfect storm: a large, young, increasingly educated but frustrated population, facing a shrinking pool of formal employment opportunities. The informal sector, including activities like illegal mining, street vending, and waste picking, becomes the default economy for millions. The Gugulethu gold rush is just a particularly vivid illustration of this dynamic. Now, let's bring this conversation closer to home. Kenya, under President William Ruto, is also grappling with high unemployment, particularly among the youth. Our unemployment rate, while lower than South Africa's, is still a critical concern, officially around 10% but believed to be much higher in reality, especially when considering underemployment. President Ruto's administration has championed the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, or BETA, focusing on empowering micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, the so-called hustler economy. The philosophy is to support the informal sector that already employs the majority of Kenyans, rather than waiting for large, foreign-led industrial projects to create jobs. This approach recognizes the reality on the ground. It acknowledges that for many, the choice isn't between a formal job and an informal one, it's between an informal hustle and starvation. The debate in Kenya mirrors the one in South Africa. Should the government's priority be strict regulation and formalization, which can stifle grassroots entrepreneurship, or should it be enabling and supporting the informal survival strategies that people have already adopted? Critics of the hands-off or enabling approach argue that it entrenches poverty and denies workers protections, fair wages, and career progression. They point to the need for large-scale, job-creating investments in manufacturing, tech, and green energy. Proponents argue that you must meet people where they are, that capital and support injected directly at the grassroots level can have a more immediate and transformative effect. They point to successful digital hustles, creative arts, and agriculture. The risk, as seen in Gugulethu, is that when all formal and supported informal avenues seem closed, people will turn to desperate and dangerous measures. The value of the gold found in that field, while life-changing for individuals, was a drop in the ocean economically. But the social cost of the desperation it represents is incalculable. Let's consider the potential total value extracted during the short-lived rush. If we estimate 50 miners working for 10 days, each earning an average of £78.56 per day, the midpoint between the reported figures, the total economic activity generated was approximately £39,280, or about $52,000. In the context of a national budget, this is nothing. But for that community, it represented a significant, albeit temporary, cash injection. It was an informal, hyper-local stimulus package driven by sheer need. This highlights a critical point: poverty is not just a lack of money, it's a lack of options. When people are presented with even a glimmer of a viable option, they will seize it regardless of the risks or legality. The shutdown of the mine didn't solve the problem of hunger, it merely removed one precarious option. The people of Gugulethu are back to square one, still hungry, still without jobs. So, what is the way forward? There are no easy answers, but the debate centers on a few key areas. First, education and skills training must be radically realigned with the economy of the future. This means not just degrees, but practical skills in renewable energy, digital services, and sustainable agriculture. Second, there must be a massive investment in infrastructure that unlocks economic potential, not just in cities but in townships and rural areas. Reliable electricity, internet access, and transport links are the bedrock of modern small business. Third, governments need to streamline the process of formalizing small businesses, reducing the red tape and costs that keep hustlers in the shadows. And fourth, there must be a social safety net that prevents hunger from being the primary motivator for economic activity. Basic level of food security gives people the breathing room to plan, to train, and to build something sustainable rather than scavenging for survival. The story from Gugulethu is a warning. It's a stark, visual metaphor for the global inequality crisis. It shows us what happens when the gap between the rich and the poor becomes a chasm, and when the ladder of opportunity is pulled up. The sight of people digging for gold flakes in a field is not a sign of greed, it's a sign of systemic failure. As we in Kenya continue our own national conversation about jobs, the hustler economy, and economic transformation under President Ruto, we must keep the images from Gugulethu in mind. The goal cannot simply be to stop people from digging desperate holes. The goal must be to build a world where they never feel the need to pick up the shovel in the first place. That is the great challenge of our time. For Kenya News Update today, I'm your host. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to Kenya News Update today.